Okay. Compendium of Conditionality is a chapter 8. The chapter 8. And this chapter covers two aspects. One is called the method of dependent origination, which we are very familiar with. But the other one is called the method of conditional relations, which we are not familiar at all. The method of conditional relations, they are 24. We call patana. Patana, 24 patana. In my book, in my English book, you cannot find this one. But you can find this, the method of conditional relations, in my Chinese book. I spend a lot of time write this in Chinese, but not in English, unless somebody can help me to translate into English. Okay. However, to understand the conditionality, the method of dependent origination is enough. Okay. The dependent origination, Pali we call paticca samuppada. Paticca samuppada. So one day, Ananda is Sotapanna, Buddha's kapia. So one day he approached the Buddha and told Buddha, he said, Venerable Sir, dependent origination is very profound. Although Buddha mentioned many times dependent origination is very profound, but it appeared to me, it appeared to my insight is very clear. Ananda told Buddha. Dependent origination appeared to his insight is very clear. And we will see what Buddha answered to Ananda. Buddha said, Ananda, this dependent origination is profound and appears profound. It's through not understanding, not penetrating this doctrine that the world has become a tangled ball of thread, a bird's nest, a thicket of reeds, and does not escape from woeful states of existence. So human beings cannot escape from the four woeful states of existence because of not understanding dependent origination. And they cannot escape from the unfortunate cause, from perdition, from suffering in a round of rebirths. So this is said in Dikha Nikaya, Long Discourse, Sutta 15. So from this statement, we come to understanding the importance of dependent origination. If we want to escape from the four woeful states, or if we want to escape from the suffering in a round of rebirths, we have to understand dependent origination. And the Venerable Sariputta said one time, he said, whoever understands dependent origination, whoever sees the dependent origination sees the Dhamma. So when you see dependent origination, you see the Dhamma. Okay. So what is dependent origination? Dependent origination is the doctrine of conditionality, cause and effect, to show how an individual or mind and matter. Here to say individual is conventional truth, but sometimes we have to, although conventional truth is not it's not the ultimate truth that we study in Abhidhamma. However, we living in this conventional world, sometimes we got to use conventional truth in order for conventional people to understand, right? So this dependent origination is to show an individual, which is conventional truth, or ultimate truth is called mind and matter. So it's to show how mind and matter revolve in the wheel of existence, undergoing the cycle of birth and death, and how the suffering ceases by the cessation of the causes and conditions that perpetuate the cycle. So another word, dependent origination says, why suffering arises, how suffering ceases. This is what is dependent origination. So when we talk about dependent origination, this very famous formula, when this exists, iti imasaming sati idang hoti. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. For example, when this exists, when birth exists, then aging and death comes to be. And when this does not exist, when birth does not exist, then aging and death do not come to be. So in other words, the arising of something is depend on another factor. This is called dependent origination or conditionality. Now, when we talk about the dependent origination, then we used to talk about 12 links. We call the cycle of dependent origination involve 12 links. I think all of you have to learn by heart this 12 link, even in Pali. Let's go one by one, this 12 link. So number one, usually we start with ignorance. Avija, paccaya, sankhara. Because of ignorance, karmic formations. Sankhara, paccaya, vijnana. Because of karmic formation, consciousness. Vijnana, paccaya, nama, rupa. Because of consciousness, then mind and matter. Nama, rupa, paccaya, salayatana. Because of mind and matter, then 6 sense spaces. Salayatana, paccaya, paso. Because of 6 sense spaces, then contact arises. Because of contact, feeling arises. Because of feeling, craving arises. Because of craving, clinging arises. Because of clinging, becoming. There's becoming. When there's becoming, then birth come to be. When birth exists, there is decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Thus arise the whole mess of suffering. This is dependent origination. So although we start, after this class, I hope everybody learn by heart this 12 links of dependent origination. So although we start with ignorant, we start with ignorant, but this does not mean ignorant is the first cause. In the teaching of the Buddha, there's no first cause. If you insist and you stubborn want to find what is the first cause of the arising of this suffering, then Buddha will give you an example. He said that suppose a man was shot by an arrow, and there's a physician want to treat him, want to take out his poisonous arrow, and this patient says, no, please don't take out the arrow. Don't take out the arrow, shoot to me. I want to know who shoot the arrow. Is this arrow Malaysia make, or Germany make, or American make? And what poison they use to shoot this arrow? You tell me first before you take out the arrow. Buddha said, then this person will die of poison before he was healed. Similarly, it's not important to find out the first cause, but is good enough to find out the cause of suffering, which is ignorance and craving. To find out these two, the cause of suffering is enough, although this may not be the first cause. First cause is not important at all in the teaching of the Buddha. Okay, so these 12 links are the common accepted dependent origination. But for your knowledge, some sutta did not mention ignorance and karmic formations. For example, Sutta Samyutta Nikaya, Nidana Samyutta 12 and Sutta 39 direct mention consciousness first. When mind consciousness arises depend on mind and matter and depend on 6 sense bases. He said that because of volition, when there's volition, there's consciousness. And when there's consciousness, there's mind and matter. So some sutta may not mention ignorant and karmic formation. But most of the sutta mention ignorant first, because of ignorant karmic formation. So, so each factor, whether it's ignorant, karmic formation, or consciousness, each factor is entirely dependent upon other factors as supporting conditions, and in turn becomes the supporting condition for still other factors. For example, karmic formation arise dependent on ignorance, right? And yet karmic formation itself become the supporting factor for the arising of consciousness. This is what it means. Each factor is entirely dependent upon other factors. Like karmic formation is entirely dependent on ignorance. And karmic formation itself in turn becomes the supporting factor or supporting condition for consciousness to arise. So, and also another example, 6 sense bases arise dependent on mind and matter as a supporting condition. And 6 sense bases itself become the supporting factor, a supporting condition for contact to arise. Therefore, everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. Nothing stands alone. This conditionality. Everything affects everything else. This dependent origination. Okay? You've got to understand this point first. And here I'd like to mention one important point. So whenever people talk about a condition, the dependent origination, people think there's one person undergo the cycle of birth and death. But here Buddha mentioned that depend on the ignorance, karmic formation, depend on karmic formation consciousness, and go on, depend on the birth, then there's decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. And you see what Buddha said, thus arise the whole mass of suffering. Buddha didn't say that thus arise the whole person, the whole beings, arise a being or permanent self. No, he didn't mention that. He only mentioned thus arise the whole mass of suffering. This conveys a very important message. Suffering exists, but no one undergo suffering. Right? You see, ignorance is mental factor. Karmic formation also mental factor. Consciousness, mind and matter is mental factor, and matter, rupa. 6 sense bases are rupa. Contact is mental factor. And the birth, you may say birth. Then I was born. When you say I was born, you are using conventional truth. So what is birth? Birth is the arising or manifestation of 5 aggregate is called birth. Right? So before you can understand dependent origination clearly, I want you to have right view first. Right view must always come first. So you should see dependent origination in terms of mind and body, mind and matter, not in terms of a personality, not in terms of a he, she, me, and so on. As you cannot find anything from the 12 links. You cannot find self in ignorance. You also cannot find self in consciousness. You cannot find cells in feeling. You also cannot find a cell in birth. Birth is the arising of 5 aggregates, right? And they are causes. They are cause and condition for the arising of birth. Okay, so please hold this or stricten your view first. There's no one undergo the cycle of birth, but suffering exists. No one undergo suffering. Now, I want to give you another aspect of dependent origination, another way of looking at dependent origination. So, in Samyutta Nikaya 12, Nidana Samyutta, and Sutta 65 here. Sutta 65. And Buddha recall when he was Bodhisattva. When he was Bodhisattva, he started to think. When what exists, they come to be aging and death. Or another word, what causes aging and death? And this is much more important for us to ask ourselves, because we all have to face aging and death, right? No one can escape, even the Bodhisattva, even the Buddha, no one can escape from aging and death. So this is very practical question that we got to ask ourselves. What causes aging and death? Or when what exists, the aging and death comes to be? This is the common question usually asked by all bodhisattva before they come to conclusion of dependent origination, before they discover the 12 links of dependent origination. This is a common question. Even for us, we have to ask this question, right? So in the sutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya 1265, and this Bodhisattva, Buddha's past life, he asked, what caused aging and death? So through investigation, therefore investigation is also very important. Somebody think that Vipassana cannot think at all, which I do not agree. Vipassana, sometimes you need to think, you need to investigate the Dhamma. We call Dhamma Vichaya Sambojjhanga. One of the factors of enlightenment is investigation. So you have to investigate, we have to investigate, or Bodhisattva investigate what caused aging and death. So through investigation, he said, he break through the insight. The aging and death is caused by birth. Right? It's caused by birth. But we don't stop here, right? Now we already come to existence. The birth is already there already. So knowing birth is not enough. Knowing birth is the cause of aging and death is not enough at all, because we still will undergo the aging and death. Therefore, we need to investigate again. What caused birth? Or when what exists that comes to be birth? Then upon investigation, the Bodhisattva realized, oh, there is becoming. Becoming means karma becoming. Whatever karma we do, whether good or bad, it leaves behind karmic energy. This karmic energy, when meet with right conditions, will spring up and become birth. This is called becoming. So, there must be karma becoming, the cause birth. By that also not enough. By this discovery also not enough to bring the cessation of suffering, right? Therefore, we need to investigate again. So Bodhisattva investigate what cause becoming? There's clinging to self, clinging to rights and riches, clinging to certain view. Then what cause clinging to arise? There's craving for existence, craving for life, craving for sensual pleasures. And what cause craving? Because of feeling, especially pleasant feeling. When you have pleasant feeling, you crave for more and more. You want the pleasant feeling to come back again and again. So craving is caused by feeling. And what causes feeling? Because of contact. Eye contact, when I see somebody beautiful, then we have pleasant feeling and we crave more. Then when ear hears somebody's praise, then the ear, there's pleasant feeling. So feeling comes from contact, and there are six types of contact, right? Eye, ear, nose, body, tongue, and mind. And contact also dependent arising state. Contact is also dependent a recent phenomena. So what caused contact to arise? There's 6 sense bases. Without eye, how can we have eye contact? Without ear, how can we have ear contact? Without body, how can we have body contact? Therefore, 6 sense bases are the cause for arising, are the condition for the arising of contact. Then 6 sense bases arise depend on mind and matter. Without body, matter, without 4 elements, then eye, ear, nose, body, tongue cannot arise, right? So depend on mind and matter. And mind and matter arise depend on consciousness. Because consciousness is forerunner for the mental factor. Right? And consciousness also can produce rupa. So from the Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 12.65, in this sutta, after consciousness, Bodhisattva turn back. Instead of consciousness is caused by karmic formation is caused by ignorance. This sutta stop up to consciousness. Then the Bodhisattva asks, what caused consciousness? What caused consciousness to arise? Then he investigated. Then he realized, he discovered that consciousness arises because of mind and matter, which is also correct, right? We have studied Abhidhamma. Without mental factor, consciousness cannot arise. Without matter, consciousness also cannot arise. So consciousness arise depend on mind and matter is also correct. So then mind and matter, then from the consciousness turn back to mind and matter, from mind and matter turn back to 6 sense bases, from 6 sense bases turn back to contact, and so on. So this is another way of looking at dependent origination, which is very related to our present dilemma, the present suffering we face, which is aging and death. Okay, so yes, for some sutta, the dependent origination started from the craving. Some sutta started from feeling. So there are many ways you can, you can start with dependent origination, right? But to show the cycle of rebirth, usually we start with ignorance. To show the 3 life, past life, future life, and present life, we show the 12 links of dependent origination. But in our Vipassana meditation, we can direct start with the feeling. Or in our the suffering we faced, if you want to investigate the suffering we face now, we can start with aging and death and so on. So there are many ways and many angles to look at dependent origination. This is the extra knowledge that I give to you. Huh? Okay, let us come to ignorant. Avija, pachaya, sankhara. Depend on ignorant karmic formation. Now we go to the 12 links and we will study one by one. What is the meaning? Then how each link cause another link to arise. Okay. Now, okay, ignorant, avija. What is ignorance? The characteristic of ignorance is mental blindness or unknowing. Cannot see clearly because mentally blind. So ignorant has the meaning characteristic of unknowing, not only unknowing, but know wrongly, the even worse. So I would like to explain what is ignorant, unknowing, and know wrongly. How ignorant knows wrongly, I will explain when I reach ignorant cause karmic formation. Okay. Then the function is to confuse. So when ignorance arises in the mind, you just cannot make decision. The mind is very confused, cannot see which one is correct, which one is wrong. This ignorance. Then manifestation, how it appears in the mind. When ignorance arises in the mind, how the mind feels. The mind becomes non-penetration, cannot see things clearly, non-penetration or concealment of true nature of object. What is the true nature of object? For example, sabbe sankhara anicca. All formation, all objects are impermanent. But when there's ignorance, then the anicca, the impermanent nature of true object is concealed. Therefore, you cannot see clearly. And the suffering nature of object is concealed. And non-self nature of object is concealed. Therefore, you cannot see clearly. This is called ignorance. Okay. Okay. So in the sutta, if you open the sutta, Buddha say, what is ignorance? Usually the answer is very clear. Not knowing Four Noble Truths is ignorance. The answer is so clear and so precise. So, what is ignorance? Number one, not knowing the truth of suffering. Second, not knowing the origin of suffering. Third, not knowing the cessation of suffering, and not knowing the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So according to Sutta, ignorance is not knowing the Four Noble Truths. But according to Abhidhamma, there are more. Not knowing the past 5 aggregates is also ignorant. And not knowing the future 5 aggregates is also ignorant. Not knowing the past, for example, Christian. Christian, they don't believe the past 5 aggregates. They only believe the present 5 aggregate and the future. So in this sense, we can say there is ignorance in them. And the future, not knowing future 5 aggregates. For some annihilation view, for some people who hold the annihilation view, they think after death nothing exists. So they are ignorant about there will be future 5 aggregates. And the 7, the past and the future 5 aggregates together. Some may believe, some may ignorant there is past 5 aggregate, but they believe future aggregate, like Christian believe future aggregate, but they don't believe the past aggregate. But for some, they are ignorant about the future and the past, both together. Just like annihilation view, they don't believe both past and future. Then not knowing specific conditionality and conditionally reason states, including karma and its consequences. So not knowing specific conditionality and conditionally reason state itself is dependent origination. Or in other words, ignorant about dependent origination, right? Because it dependent origination also cover karma and its consequences. Okay, so if we do not have knowledge about these 8 things, then we have ignorance in our mind.